Hi, welcome to this week's edition of the Blues Talk. Again, John, Dave, and myself. We're going to look back over Leinster's victory against Cardiff last weekend, Ireland's loss against England, and of course, look forward to our games at the weekend against who are we playing? We're playing Scarlets for Leinster and Georgia for Ireland. So, boys, we'll start off with Leinster's match. 40 points to 5 victory over Cardiff. Our season just keeps on rolling. 7 wins, 7 bonus points, 35 maximum points.
At least Cardiff made us fucking work for it this time. They put in a bit of grunt. Unusually for Cardiff, it's usually the Ospreys or it's usually somebody else that puts in even the Dragons put in a shift. But Cardiff really put in a shift this time. I know we beat them and we beat them fairly well on the scoreboard. And in general, but they did give us. They were committed till the end. I thought there was a few good performances on our side. Good to see a few fellas playing well, but and good to see Dan Levy getting on from the start and creasing fellas. Harry Byrne. I reckon he's probably must be whatever niggle he had must be okay because they let him kick again. But he didn't have it all his own way. He got creamed himself a little bit. Frawley rocked on. He's had a good one as well. But yeah, Cardiff. Wow, who saw that coming? Me about 5 years ago, but since that, I don't know.
But you dropped them quick enough, John.
I think for a long time, for maybe 20 minutes in the middle of the match, maybe a bit more, Leinster played a lot of kind of stupid rugby. There was a lot of load, fire, aim going on. They were trying to buckle all the swashes without taking the sword out of the scabbard, as it were. And then you could see that there was a change of mind about 10 minutes into the second half, and they started hitting the ball up hard, using the pack, going one out, hard runners, and Cardiff couldn't, for all their resistance, as John says, Cardiff were admirably resistant to what Leinster were trying to do. For all their resistance, they just couldn't keep the tide at bay, and that's where Leinster, really began to push on when they started using the forwards, started using one out runners coming from deep with plenty of support. And that was the end of it, and that's how we got, obviously, or that's how we generated the momentum for the last 2 tries. It was a decent enough performance. A lot of guys played well. Ruddock continues to play well. I always think that he's much underrated is Murphy on the blind side. It's hard to say a whole lot about the game, to be honest with you. We were good. We got a bonus point. I mean, you could just change the team name for every game this season so far.
Yeah. Like, it's again, we kind of mentioned it last year. We're kind of ticking the names because a lot of, this is probably a very unusual situation for Leinster that we're continually playing the core of the same team 5-6 games on the bounce now. But there's certain times No, I know that, but I'm just saying that we're kind of keeping. We don't really get a chance to do that very often because it's always been mixed in matches, and the same kind of names are cropping up again as sort of the outstanding performers. Like Dave Carney scored a try after 36 or 37, whatever it was, seconds. That was his 4th of the season. Scott Penny has got another try. I think that's his 5th of the season. I thought Harry Byrne was I would say it was one of his least impressive performances, yet he can still put through a gorgeous little rubber kick, and he shows just a few little snatches of really, really good skill. And Frawley, I thought, was very active throughout the game too. So it's as they're saying, the same names are been repeated over of the ones that are kind of, that cream is starting to rise to the crop of our second 15.
I've watched it a number of times since, and I still have no idea how Jimmy O'Brien ended up with that ball in his hands when he kicked through for his try. I still don't know how he did it, but he did it. He is good pace. He really, really does. That was a very good try. That was all his own work. He's another one. I mean, Hugo Keenan's not going to have his own way when he comes back. You know, if he comes back thinking that number 15 jersey is his by right, it's not yet.
Hmm.
Did he get injured though?
Yeah, apparently he picked up a knock, but I don't know how serious it is. We won't know. Look, we won't know how serious any of the injuries are until Europe starts.
I saw there was a press conference either today or yesterday, and Lancaster was talking about Tyke Furlong. Didn't sound overly positive. He said definitely won't be available for, like, we'll struggle to make Europe. I think he was kind of hinting at, because there's 2 weeks. I think there's a gap week in between. We've one more round of Pro 14s. I think there's a gap week, and then the European matches roll around.
Hopefully Porter doesn't get injured, so, or we're not looking so hot.
I mean, one guy deserves an awful lot of praise, and I think if people are really beginning to see his value now is Michael Bent.
Yeah,
only beginning.
Yeah,
Jesus.
Well, I mean, for a long time there was that whole confusion thing when he first came over. He really came over as a development player, but we had a lot of injuries, and Declan Kidney had to put him straight into the Irish team because he was
that long ago. Was Kidney?
Yeah,
was it that long ago?
Yeah,
was Kidney?
Yeah.
Wow.
Because he was pretty much the only fit tight head prop in the country, and people went, "Oh, he's an international. He should be, you know." But he's not really. Like, he was brought over as a development player, and the idea was that Greg Feek we were only going to see the good of him a year or maybe 18 months down the line from his signing. So when he wasn't an international player, when we saw him every week for Leinster, people were beginning to go, "Oh, what's the story here?" I think people are beginning to see now the value of. I mean, fair play to Greg Feek's scouting, because I mean, he's a real kind of cornerstone guy. A guy like, he's one of the guys that team is built around, that this season, and indeed for most of the end of last season.
Performance I always think of from him was, we went to Brive, wasn't? No, it wasn't Brive. It was the south of France anyway. Ian Madigan kicked all the points. I think we won 18-15 or something like that. It was
the Cast.
That's who it was, yeah. And it's going back a bit. I was actually at it, and I just remember he had to hold up. I think I can't remember the exact details, but he either played 80 minutes or he played both sides, or he did something anyway, and we had no one else, and he held that scrum up against some fairly fierce Cast scrummaging, and that pretty much won us the game. So I was in the loyal band of Michael Bent back then, and he's never let us down. And I always say he's possibly one of the best third choice tight head props in Europe.
Yeah, that's the exact same point I was going to make, John. I'd say there's very few teams that have a third choice tight head prop on his level.
Yeah, maybe Saracens. There might be the odd, very rich French club, but that's it. And even then, it'll be close enough, So, like, he's worth his weight in gold. Tight head prop has historically been the most, in the professional era, been the most valuable position on the field across all leagues. So, if you have a good one like him, just keep it. And in a pinch, he can play loose head too. I know he hasn't in a while, but he's a bloody good loose head also.
Actually, in fairness to loose heads, I think Michael Milne, you can actually see him get better every single match. There's never been a problem with his carrying and stuff like that, but I thought against Cardiff when he came on, his scrummaging has really come on. You can actually see it improve game by game. Which is
guys like that getting a run of games is great for them, because they don't get a chance like that in Leinster too often. So to see guys, like you said it earlier, about same guys in the same positions, Michael Bent's played every game, I think, of the Pro 14 this season. And Harry Byrne has been pretty much there the whole time as well at 10. And Milne has been a constant also. So, it's great to see those guys. And
certainly hungry for work. He always seems to want to get his hands on the ball.
Yeah.
But I'm in another WhatsApp discussion, I was talking to somebody, and like their point was, well, can he scrummage? And that's always kind of the other side of the coin of a someone like a prop. It's great seeing him going forward with the ball under his arm, but You know,
Well,
ultimately you want him to be able to scrummage.
That's
Sure.
that's what I was saying. Like, I mean, at the beginning of the season, that's where I see the improvement. I mean, as a ball carrier, he's very good. But what I look for, like you say, in a prop is his ability to scrummage, and you can see that coming on game by game by game.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of propping is experience, you know, because you're coming up against guys who are going to try tricks on you. So you have to learn these tricks and how to counter them. And the only way to do that is to play against them.
What did they call it? Flying lessons.
Yeah.
That's it.
He got his flying lessons off a few lads, all right.
We just quickly look at some of the other results. Ulster had a good win against our opponents next week, Scarlets.
The Welsh are revolting, Jason, over that one.
Hmm?
The Welsh
Yes.
are revolting over that one.
They are, I
The
believe.
non-red card, or the Treadwell decision.
What did you think of that, lads?
It was a red card.
It probably was a red card, yeah. Fair
Okay.
enough.
The ref was definitely talked out of it by the TMO.
The Irish TMO. Yeah, no, I thought it was a red card. I'm not sure how. I'm not sure how he allowed it to. He said there wasn't sufficient force.
I'm not sure if that's a mitigating factor.
It is on the framework. It is on the framework, but they look like plenty force to me.
Yeah,
Mm.
yeah, agreed. I thought, like, if you're gonna implement those laws or rules, you have to abide by them,
Yeah.
and you know it should be a level playing field across all the different.
Well, that's the point of the decision-making
all the
framework that
games.
they introduced to introduce consistency across that decision-making process when faced with that situation. I'm just not sure how he could have come up with the idea that didn't have sufficient force to warrant a red card, because it did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they were struggling to win that game, in fairness. If they had 14 men, they wouldn't have a bloody chance of winning it. So, especially without a second row. You know? So, yeah, I don't necessarily blame the Welsh for being revolting in this situation. But, yeah, there you go.
I mean, they do love a whinge about supposed Irish conspiracies, etc.
Yeah.
But in this case, the whinge about the decision was certainly justified.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Munster travelled over to Glasgow on Monday night. Oh, sorry, just before we go on, see, there was 1,000 people at that match up in Ravenhill.
Yeah, so I see. Yeah,
Like,
You could hear them.
yeah, no, I mean, I was envious of them being able to go to a game, but I think under the current circumstances, I'm not sure if it's the right thing to be doing, but it's obviously they're adhering to the regulations that are in place in Northern Ireland.
That's all you can do. I mean, I go to the RDS tomorrow if I was let. I wouldn't have a problem with it. Obviously, Neffet might have a problem with it, but if they were on side, I'd be there. Be there tomorrow.
yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
if the local public health management says it's okay, then it's okay. That's kind of the way you have to look at it, you know. So,
Our Taoiseach, just I know we're probably going off topic here, but our Taoiseach today said he's advising people not to travel to Northern Ireland, yet they were letting 1,000 people into it.
yeah, I certainly wouldn't be fond of, you know, for however you want to describe it, crossing an international border, as it were, even one as nebulous as the one between North and South. But
All right, we digress, I think, lads.
Yeah.
yes, when the really important game that happened in Ulster was, of course, in Armagh and not in Belfast.
You couldn't wait to get that one in, Dave. We might come back to that in a couple of weeks.
We're stuck for stuff.
Well, as I said, on Monday night, Munster travelled over to Glasgow. I think Munster are certainly, well, they're seconds anyway, I mean, but they're certainly starting to build a nice team there. You know, there's a good core. They're 8, 9, and 10 are looking pretty good. You know, and like obviously they're not, you know, the finished article yet, but they're definitely putting some green shoots for the future with those three lads.
The only thing,
Sorry, Dave.
I agree with you entirely. The only thing is Van Graan's a very, very conservative selector. So I could see when Murray and Stander are back, I could see the two boys having a bit of a break. No matter how well or how poorly any of the four players involved are playing. But that's not his problem right now. And right now, he's got Casey and Healy are tapping away nicely. Gavin Coombs is going very, very well. Mike Haley is doing decent work at fullback. I mean, he's not setting the world on fire, but then sometimes you don't want a fullback to set the world on fire. All you want the fullback to put the fire out.
Exactly.
Yeah, but like they've signed Gallagher from Saracens. He played. Well, I can remember him playing one game for them so far. He scored a couple of tries. I think it was against Dragons, and looked really impressive. And hasn't really been heard of or seen from since.
Sure, wasn't he not playing at the weekend on the wing?
Oh, was he? Sorry,
Yeah.
I wasn't aware. Okay, that's okay then. Once he's not been neglected, because
He has played on the wing a
I'm
few
old
times.
enough to remember his dad like the rest of us, so
Yeah.
I kind of have a soft spot for him.
Yeah, no, he's been playing most of his rugby on the wing so far for Munster because Haley's been so good,
Yeah.
I love your man at the 8. I mean, he's got most of the things that CJ Stander has got, and he's probably better on the back of a scrum, or at least he will be.
Mm.
And I think he's a cracker. I'm very impressed with the guy.
Yeah,
And
they seem to have decided to move Hodnett because your man has been so impressive. I mean, Hodnett was the number 8 on the Grand Slam winning team, and looked really good. I remember at the time saying he reminded me a lot of a young Anthony Foley. Just his game intelligence and stuff like that. But
his nets.
yeah, I thought that Coombs seems to have come through and just sees that jersey, and they've decided to move Hodnett either to 7 or 6, which is an interesting decision.
Yeah, well, you've always been saying they should have moved CJ to 6. So
Yeah, I've always believed that. I've always believed CJ's best position can do his best work at 6, and I think it balances the back row better. But
well, that might lead us on neatly to where he played at the weekend.
are we going to discuss
We'll come back to the
under
Ireland
the
game.
thumb of English back rows?
Just the other Irish result of the weekend was Connacht beat Zebre. Fairly predictable enough. I suppose it's good to see them back on winning ways after their couple of defeats and then their match postponed.
Yeah, the son-in-law derby.
Well, I suppose turning our attention now to the big match that was in Twickenham. The scoreline wouldn't reflect the mauling that England gave us, 18-7, would suggest it was a tighter match than I think it really was.
For sure. I think we were saying here last week, or at least I was, about that maybe he was selecting a team to go out and give him what for, and that's why they were all so big. Selecting O'Mahony at 7, who's normally a 6, and selecting 2 lumps in the centre, and yada yada yada. And if what he wanted to do was to stand up to them, well, they stood up to them. Unfortunately, England could just stand there and pick us off. They didn't really need to do much to win that game. They could just sit back and pick us off with kicks, watch our line out implode in front of them, and gift them a try or 2. So if we had played better, maybe England might have played better to put more points on us. But we'll never know. Maybe all he was trying to do was show them that they could actually stand up to them physically. And if that's what he was doing. However, there was plenty of shite to go around. We can give out about as many of the players as you like. Poor old Ross Byrne has copped a lot of. I mean, look at it. The man has had 2 starts for Ireland, both at Twickenham. Both, okay, neither of them were in games that mattered a whole heap, but he's been on the receiving end, and I think we're probably all agreed that at the very top end, he's not really a breaking threat because he doesn't have a lot of pace. So that kind of limits people's options, like it limits his options. And, all you can do when you get a ball is pass it, kick it, or run it. So you pretty much know he's not going to run it. And if he does, he's not going to get very far quickly. So you can line up the first centre and cream him because he's going to get the ball, and if he's not, it's a cross kick. So he's he's a fine player and has proven it at Heineken Cup level, and obviously below he's an absolutely fantastic player. But I just feel at the top level he doesn't have the tools. He has all the cross kick and stuff. He has he has the brain, but he just physically doesn't seem to have enough pace or enough whatever it is. And people are criticizing him for standing too deep. He was just going to get whacked earlier. If he stood 5 yards further up, he was going to get creased, a third of a second earlier, or 2 seconds earlier, whatever it is. I'm not sure he was necessarily the problem, but he's getting he's getting it in the neck. And yeah, he didn't have a great game, but that's my thoughts anyway. Feel free to tear them apart.
I don't necessarily disagree with what you're saying, John, but to a certain extent, you can blame the deck chairs, you can blame the iceberg, but sometimes it's the fucking Titanic, and every single media outlet, every single podcast, every single pundit knew that England were going to come out and play the way that England played. And the only people who didn't have a plan for it was us. I mean, we seemed to be absolutely astounded that England played the way that they always play and that everyone predicted they'd play. And we didn't come up with a plan to actually counter that or get around it. And, it's not the first time it's happened. I mean, that's 3 times in a row that England have absolutely, whatever the scoreline says, hockeyed us.
Well, maybe we're saving it for
every single time we've done the same thing. We've just thought, we'll just do this and that'll work. Well, it hasn't worked, and it didn't work last time, but it'll work this time. Well, it didn't work those last 2 times, but I'm sure it'll work this time. And it hasn't worked. The plan A doesn't work against England. It's as simple as that. So I don't know why the fuck you keep playing plan A.
It's a recurring theme. I mean, think back to the matches we've played this season. We've showed very little creativity. If you think even from the kickoff of the match against England, in our first possession, the first instinct was to try and chip to the wing. Like, that should be our last resort. And he resorted to that. Just saying that we've no creativity. When we played with all of our main players playing against France. So, take Washburn out of the equation and put back in Ringrose and Henshaw. When we had an extra man when their fullback against France was sent to the bin, and we still went through the middle. We still tried to go one-off runners, pick and drive from when we were 5 or 10 meters out from their line, instead of trying to look for space out wide. And we continue to do it. And you might get away with it against France. You might get away with it against Wales and Italy. We know you can't do that against England because they just line you up and knock you down. And particularly when you have a brilliant back row like they have, and someone like Maro Itoje, who seems to be able to stretch his arms in and get on that ball at will.
His ruck decisions are unbelievable. If you watch the process you can see him do it. Like, the rucks he challenges and the rucks he doesn't. He never goes into a ruck that he doesn't win. Never. I mean, his decision-making process, his situational assessment skills are just unbelievable. He's up there with...
Sorry, Dave. He's also such a big, awkward faker. Now, he's annoying as hell in a good way and in a bad way. Like, he's full of all the banter and the patting on the back and tapping on the head shite. But he's annoying in other more legitimate ways too. Like, he's a demon. For me, he's one of the world players of the year. He's got to win that in the next.
No, he's definitely the best player in the world right now. I mean, there's no question of it.
Yeah.
He's definitely the best player in the world right now.
And probably has been for the last 2 years.
Yeah, certainly the last 12 months.
What age is he? 25? 26?
So, I mean, it was a brilliant idea to come up with a game plan that ran the ball into him as much as possible.
Yeah, and lads, like we showed no variation. Like, we had so much possession, like the pack is providing the ball. It's not very good ball, but they're providing ball to our backs. And with the exception of when Ross Byrne kicked through for Farrell, when he was held up over the line, and when Billy Burns kicked over the top for Stockwell that he scored, Stockdale that he scored his try. Like that was the only time that we varied it. And if they play such a flat up defense, there's lots of room in behind for a good chip. But we never did it. We just ran straight into them, trying to use Bundy and Chris Farrell to batter through them, and like they just knocked us over like Skittles all the time.
The thing that
They made 200.
The thing that annoys me isn't so much that we were trying to use Bundy and Chris Farrell to bash into them. It's the fact that Bundy and Chris Farrell can bash into them. They're quite good at that. And they're also brilliant offloaders. And we weren't running anyone on trailing runs.
Correct.
Because, to be honest, the guys were getting hit so hard that everyone who might have been running a trailing run had to actually go in and win the ruck ball. There was no attempt to play off those guys, to use them as platforms. It was just hit it up, win the ruck. Hit it up, win the ruck. We weren't trying to. I mean, how many times when Connacht were in their pomp under Pat Lam, did Bundy Aki take the ball into 2 or 3 guys, and then with a little dinky one out the back door, somebody else would go flying through, or Henshaw would go flying through, or Matt Healy would go flying through. We never tried that. And the other thing we never did is we kept our wings on the wing. Instead of bringing
Lowe comes in. Lowe comes in looking for work.
Yeah, but that wasn't part of we didn't do that as part. It wasn't part of a plan that not like we did against Wales. Against England, we kind of kept them out in the wing. So at worst, the England centres only had to face 1-on-1s instead of maybe 2-on-1s with a third guy. They didn't have to worry about will he pass out, or will he do an inside pass, or will he go short or long. We gave them easy decisions to make. They had to make a lot of tackles, but a lot of them were. I mean, England did make a huge number of tackles. But a lot of them weren't hard tackles to make.
Indeed.
Yeah.
And they are so good at it, like you say, 2-on-1 tackles. That back row they have, though, is freaking class. Those 2 lads on the flanks are just, like, they're ridiculous. Your man with no neck is just...
Underhill.
He's a missile, and the other lad is too. The thick-looking fella. He's phenomenal.
It's easy to be.
Sounds like an East End gang. The fella with no neck.
It's easy to be a missile as an open side flanker when you don't have anyone facing you, because we didn't pick an open side flanker. We picked 2 blind sides. We kind of conceded that space to England.
And you could say they pick 2 open sides, because that's kind of what they do, and they leave the big heavy stuff to Maro and Billy,
Yeah, because they already have their blind side playing second row, but they had no competition.
Mm-hmm.
There was nobody there at the breakdown. Nobody even. It didn't have to be a big guy like Underhill. Just somebody there to to stop them winning that ball, to get them off the ball. But there was nobody there because we didn't play an open side, which. I can never understand when teams don't play open sides. Never.
Yeah, well, South Africa don't. They won the World Cup.
When Schmidt,
they do now.
When Schmidt was coaching, and the emphasis was on the ruck. It was always about the ruck. Like very good, notable players were omitted from Irish selections because they weren't prepared to work at the ruck. And like our indiscipline at the ruck time, it's in the last couple of games is atrocious. Like I was watching one that Ryan went flying in over the top. He was about 2 feet too high. He comes over the other guy and completely misses the target. Like, is that just because we would have spent hours under Schmidt? The mindset was, 3-second rucks, clear everything out and start again. Whereas it seems that it's almost like we're not putting the effort in. Maybe I'm sure they are, but it just appears that
they're not putting the thought.
We're not drilled well enough. And our line out, I mean, like that was just a shambles. There was, and again, I'm sure everything is practice, but it's repetition. But it completely malfunctioned. Going back to the match against France, we had 3 line out failures in their 22, and it was the exact same thing again. So much so that the try that May scored came off our overthrow. Now, you know, I don't like, clearly none of us have ever played international rugby, and I'm sure someone could practice, you know, line out throwing for years on end, and when they're thrown into playing in an international, their adrenaline and their heart rates are pumping all over the place. So what you think you're throwing normally, you're throwing it at twice the speed and strength. But still, like, that needs to be adjusted, and someone needs to coach Kelleher for that, you know? Like, he's played in some big games in the last 12 months.
In fairness to Kelleher, it mightn't necessarily be his fault, because the ball went where it was supposed to go. It's just the jumpers weren't there. It's a systemic thing, and it's like you say, Jason. It's like the rucks, and it's like, you know, the scrum has been a bit shaky once or twice this season, and you know, our kickoff receptions haven't been great. You know, it's all those kind of set plays that the stuff you can practice doesn't appear to have been practiced enough.
Well, there's one of the things that we actually didn't get creamed in that we might have expected to, was the scrum, and that's Quinn Roux behind Porter is probably the main reason for that. The guy's too heavy to lift in the line out. He's only about 6'5", but by Jesus, he can scrum, and that's what he's there for. He was like, they put Klein in. Like, I think Joe Schmidt looked to Klein as Quinn Roux, but 3 inches taller. But unfortunately, he was probably 2 inches less fucking useful in the scrum.
Those 2 inches.
So, you know, yeah, I don't know. I genuinely don't know the ins and outs of it, but you know, I just think Roux is just maybe he's the right height for pushing rather than jumping. I used to say that, you know, with somebody like Dev Toner, you lose in the scrums what you gain in the line out, and Dev, I think, worked very hard over the years to make that not be true so much. But on the line out, like when you've got Quinn Roux in your team, you've less as opposed to Dev Toner, you have a lot less targets because he's harder to lift and because he's not as tall. So you've got Peter O'Mahony, but I think, was it on here we were saying last week that he's great on defensive line out? You know, he's great to steal other people's ball, but not necessarily on your own line.
The primary target on our own ball, yeah.
Yeah. So,
which is
like, you've got James Ryan, who is great line out target and all that, but you've nobody like CJ Stander isn't a line out forward so much. Doris maybe, but again, he's not a real target. So that makes things harder for Kelleher. Having said that, I don't think Kelleher was throwing well. You know,
I'm not saying that at all. I'm not absolving him of all blame. I think there was if there's blame, there's plenty to go around. But it is a systems thing, because, you know, it's all right if it happens once or twice, but then if you change the personnel and it still happens, you know, you've got an issue. And the thing you have to decide, you know, something Jason often points out is there's twice as many lineouts as scrums in a match. The other side of that is most lineouts are penalised if they go wrong with a free kick. Most scrums are penalised with a penalty. So you have to come up with the balance of what's more important to you, you know, in terms of, you know, having somebody who's going to be there and he's going to lock your scrum, or he's going to help lock your tight head, but he's not going to be able to do stuff at other set pieces, as opposed to somebody who's a much better all-round player. But you lose out in terms of the power stakes at the scrum. And then you have to think, well, are we scrummaging right?
Well, we seem to be doing a much better job of it anyway. I mean, it can't be all down to Quinn Roux. I'm sure there's a lot of work gone in on our scrum.
Yeah.
Since it's been mullered a few times, both Leinster and Ireland, famously Leinster against Saracens, but, you know, and that's a lot of the English team versus a lot of the Irish team in those scrums. So you could nearly say it's, you know, it's quite similar to Ireland v England, or it's a lot of the same personnel. So
for a significant chunk of the match, it was three of the English front five versus four of the Leinster front five in that Saracens match.
Yeah.
I had a look at the two teams that took the field of Ireland against England at the weekend and Ireland against New Zealand in the World Cup 12 months ago. And, like, you know, I was trying to look for some positives out of it. So you had two guys retired, Carney and Rory Best. Currently, I make it 4 lads that are injured. Ringrose, Henshaw, Sexton, and Furlong. And then you had, so there was 5 players that were picked in both games. And you had 6 kind of new caps. So you had Hugo Keenan, James Lowe, Gibson Park, Ronan Kelleher, Doris, and I'm going to say Ross Byrne as a new cap. I know he was capped prior to the World Cup, but that was his only cap, and he didn't obviously travel. So like they're trying, they are building a new team, and like if you listen to Andy Farrell been interviewed after the match, and he said, well, the 2 teams, England and Ireland, are at different points of their cycle and their progression. And he has a point with all those retirements, injuries happen in every sport, but we've clearly got a much smaller pool to pick from than other countries. But we're also bringing in a lot of new caps. Like, as I said, there's six new lads coming through. So like there are some positives to be taken from it, that these guys in 12 months' time will be entirely different animals than they are now, with 6 or 8 international caps further under the place.
Just as an aside, people say that Andy Farrell's very, that he's a very inspiring speaker and this kind of stuff, fellas from the Lions tour. Anytime I've seen him interviewed, I don't know. I don't get that. He's kind of a bit, he's not. Now maybe he just changes completely once he gets them in the dressing room, and but I just don't get that aura of we'll go and die for this guy that people have said about the guy. Especially as a defense coach, that they go out there and run through brick walls for him because he's so inspiring.
I'd say that.
I'm not saying he isn't.
I'd say that the image a coach portrays in the media and the guy he actually is needn't necessarily bear much relation to another. I mean, Andy Farrell's been in the media eye for a very long time, since he was 16. He is the most anodyne of media performers, because that's what he wants to be. He knows how the game is played. Like, he knows how he gives no hostages to fortune in his interviews. I mean, like you say, he comes across as quite a dull interviewee, in fairness. And we know that from what players have said about him with the Lions and with Ireland in the back room, that he's not that's not who he is. I mean, in fairness, Joe Schmidt always came across as a nice, timid, mild-mannered guy in interviews, and that's not the guy he was in the dressing room.
That's true.
So what they say in front of the cameras and what they say behind the dressing room door with the door shut are very, very different things.
Anyway, sorry for that sideline.
No, it was actually an interesting point, because I know some people complained about some of the stuff he said in the post-match interview, that he wasn't self-critical enough, or of either himself or the team in the post-match interview. And of course, that's not the place to be self-critical. The place to be self-critical is, Monday morning when you're doing your review session. That's when there's no point in being critical from the media. That's just show.
Fair enough.
So we take on Georgia the weekend. Georgia's string of results haven't really been very good over the last since we've come back out of lockdown. They had a warm-up match against Scotland, which they were beaten 48-7. The day we played Italy, they were 40-0 defeat against England, and possibly the worst Welsh team ever put 18 points on them in Llanelli the weekend. So Georgia aren't really in any fine vein of form whatsoever.
Poor old Vak Abdeladziz's dad will be sick. I think he got a couple of caps for them, didn't he?
He did, yeah. His dad is a Georgian international. Look, they are what they are. I mean, they're the emergency replacement to the tournament.
Yeah, I find it hard to get worked up about the game at the weekend. Now I have to say, it's an opportunity to throw a few lads in that haven't done anything previously, or an option to give out a few new caps. Or it's a bit of a nothing game, I'm afraid. I know it's a nothing tournament anyway, but this is the nothing game out of the nothing tournament with nothing riding on it.
See, I think our selection was completely wrong for the Welsh game. We spoke about it 3 weeks ago when we were previewing the Welsh game. We should have picked a younger, more inexperienced side for that Welsh game, and then picked the experience for England, and then rest them for this particular match. Like, we haven't really rewarded form, because we've seen the form guys who have been back since we've come back out of lockdown. We've seen Ruddock coming back. We've seen Frawley for Leinster, Harry Byrne. We mentioned a few of the lads down in Munster. I'm not talking about throwing them in against England. That's not what I'm saying at all. But the Caseys, the Healy's, the Coombs, even bringing back Dave Carney or Sean Reedy, these kind of lads that are pulling up trees for their provinces at the moment aren't going to get rewarded. So their form is being ignored. And we're sticking with guys that have and rewarding guys that have been holding tackle bags for the last month in camp and not really been participating in any of the matches. Because he's not going to play his frontliners. He's not going to play. He's going to play Peter O'Mahony or CJ in this match. No, is he going to play? Like, is he going to play Conor Murray? Like, he knows what Conor Murray can provide. He knows what, Johnny Sexton comes back fit. Like, what's the point of playing these guys in this game? Is he going to pick Ross Byrne in this game? Like, and I don't want to be sticking the knife in, because I'm sure it's a very hard time for him. But, Ross Byrne is a very adequate, composed, excellent player that will get Leinster through playing Pro 14 and out of a bind in Heineken Cup. We're not going to play him in the Six Nations in 2 years' time. Like, I can't see that happening.
That's probably, I pretty much agree with what you're saying, but I wonder, is there a question in the coach's mind about the value of Pro 14 form?
Yeah, that's very true too. That's very true.
They might be saying, okay, they're tearing up trees in the Pro 14, but actually look what's happening, So there might be a question of that. I mean, and these are guys that they've had. I mean, we're talking about guys like, if you're talking about guys like Ryan Baird, you're talking about guys like Harry Byrne, other guys who have been in camp previously, like Dave Carney, Rhys Ruddock, Sean Reedy, guys that have been in the under-20 setup quite recently that Farrell will be aware of, like Coombs, Casey and Healy. And maybe he's just thinking, okay, well, maybe they will be doing something, but they're only doing it in the Pro 14, which is, I don't value that. We'll see how they go in Europe, maybe. I don't know.
And I think that was alluded to. I didn't read the article. I just saw the headline. It was kind of prove your worth in Europe was the headline. So, and like there was only one guy brought in, I presume, to replace Ed Byrne. It was Eric O'Sullivan from Ulster was subbed into the squad.
And that becomes a problem for us as a rugby nation, because if we can't get game time of value into guys in the Pro 14, there's very limited European matches, and the best players are going to play in it, which means that it's going to be very, very hard to assess the quality of the guys underneath the first choice guys, because they're not playing in Europe. So it narrows down the pool that the national coach feels confident in.
Yeah.
And like the whole point of really playing in the Pro 14 or Celtic League as it was, which ultimately led to the death of club rugby in Ireland, professional
next
club
level
rugby.
up kind of thing.
Yeah, and like if the point of the Pro 14 was to bring through players to make them ultimately qualified for Ireland or experienced to play for Ireland, but there's obviously that sort of middle tier is the European, but then like what's the point of the Pro 4? Why not just play AIL and then sub them all up and play for Leinster in the Heineken Cup?
There has to be something has to be done. Something has to be done to restore confidence in the Pro 14. Now, a lot of this is supposition, but but it's supposition that fits with my picture of things, in terms of the standard of the Pro 14 this last 6 months or so. The sooner the South African teams arrive on our shores, the better in terms of actual competition. It can't happen soon enough. I mean, it's needed, because as things stand, the Pro 14 isn't fit for purpose, and it's not serving. I mean, Andy Farrell's in a tough. It's always tough transitioning from one coaching regime to another, especially one that's been gone. That was there for. I mean, Joe Schmidt was in charge for 7 years, 8 years. He was very, very successful. So the next guy up, I mean, it's really, really hard to follow the Beatles. So it's already tough enough for him transitioning without having one of the platforms that he wants to build his new team on undermined.
But we're never happy though, really.
No.
We're like, we had Joe Schmidt, who beat the All Blacks twice, never done before, won a Grand Slam, only been done 2 other times prior to that, won 2 championships. Obviously, whatever his record was with Leinster, Heineken Cups and leagues, and so your UEFA Cups or whatever. And how quickly that, because he underperformed both in the 15 and 19 World Cups, it was seen as a failure of his legacy because of those 2 quarterfinal defeats in the World Cup, which is quite harsh, and I'd say probably very unfair and harsh, considering how well the most winning, American word here, but the most winningest coach that Irish rugby has ever had.
I always remember a line Sergei Bubka wrote in his, remember Sergei Bubka?
Yeah, the pole vaulter. This
is a line he wrote. He wrote it in his autobiography. He says, "I always thought my career was a great metaphor for sport. My every appearance ended in failure." Because that's how a pole vaulting competition works. You keep going until you have 3 failures. So he always said that he always used to think that his attitude was, my every appearance ended in failure.
Yeah, good line.
Yeah, but everybody wishes they could fail as well as him.
Oh yeah.
Or fail at as high a bar as he.
Yeah. It was always suspected that he had cleared very high heights in training, and that he used to just edge up the record marginally in competition at a lower level than he knew he could clear, in order to make sure he got a purse at the next meet for breaking the world record.
Nice to have that little bit of headroom, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. But like, just going back to the Joe Schmidt thing, like we don't really know what we had until he's gone, sort of thing.
We see
and it is obviously very hard for Farrell coming in, because our society now just expects instant success, and like it's not that easy to beat. Like only for Sinclair getting injured in that World Cup final, England would have been world champions.
Entirely possible, yeah, entirely possible. And the other thing is that Joe built his team around certain things, around certain players who were at, in the prime of their careers. He had Rory Best, he had Johnny Sexton, he had Jamie Heaslip, he had
Connell and O'Driscoll were coming.
Connell and O'Driscoll at one point, but he had guys coming through, and he had a spine that was solid for the bulk of his time in charge. And a lot of those guys either stepped off the stage or started to kind of wind down a little bit, or reach that point, the tipping point on the age performance axes. But that happened at the very end of Joe Schmidt's career, and is the reality for Andy Farrell. The reality for Andy Farrell is that, his best out half, and by a considerable distance, is Johnny Sexton. But the Johnny Sexton of 2020 isn't the Johnny Sexton of 2015 or 2016.
No, absolutely not. And isn't going to get any better either, Let's face it, he's going in one direction. But the sad thing is, he's got a bit to go before he meets the guys who are coming up the other way,
Yeah.
or they've got a bit to go before they catch him. So there's a curve here that's going on that, he may not be in 6 months' time, but he's still by a
I think
distance.
Dandy's still worth his place, kind of thing.
He's the best head half in Ireland by a distance currently. But
it'd be interesting to see what, whether it's Van Graan down in Munster, or Leo and Lancaster in Leinster, what they do, whether they're going to continue selecting the guys that have been performing well for them, that have won all those opening matches, or will they just go back and say, no, sorry, you weren't on the away with the Irish squad, so the Irish guys are going to come back and slot straight back in to the Heineken Cup. So when the Six Nations rolls around again, we're going to have the four Heineken Cup matches will have been played. I'm going to presume that they're going to pick all their Irish stars unless there's injuries, and then they're going to say, well, and I'm just taking for an example, let's say Frawley. So Frawley's playing exceptionally well at the moment, but we kind of know if Henshaw's fit, he's going to get the 12th jersey when we play our 4 Heineken Cup matches. So when Christmas comes and goes, and the Six Nations starts off in February, they're going to look at Frawley and say, well, he's been excellent in the matches he's played, but they are against the Dragons and the Pro 14 Glasgow and the Pro 14 Cardiff, but not in the Heineken Cup matches. So we're going to continue with Henshaw because he's the man in possession and he's the man who played in the big Leinster games. And yet, so Frawley will continue to languish, even though anyone that can see it can say, God, that kid's got a very bright future, but he's just not getting any opportunities.
Yeah, well, that's always the tricky balance. I mean, and in fairness, some of the guys are coming out of the international camp, they're not playing badly,
Would you say? Well, just take my point. Would you say that Henshaw has played well? I know he's injured. Would you say he's played well?
I thought he played well against France. And
a good try. He did.
And there's a big difference between playing against France and playing against.
There is.
There
absolutely is. Yeah.
And and all this. And you see, the thing is, we don't see them every. They'll come back into camp. We'll say on Monday, or whatever day it is, and the coaches will have a look at them all week and see what kind of shape they're in. These are experienced coaches, and they'll know. They'll know who's ready and who's not ready, or who's right and who's not right. I'd say you'll see 90% returning guys, but I'd say there'll be 1 or 2 guys in there who'll have kept their places. I can't see Jimmy O'Brien getting dropped, so I can't. And to be honest with you, with Ringrose out, I can't see Kieran Frawley getting dropped either.
Put Robbie Henshaw at 13.
Yeah.
O'Loughlin is back now as well. We're starting to get a few backs drifting back into the
and Montpellier is going to be a very good. I'd love to see these guys play against Montpellier, because Montpellier are a good side, and it'll be a very good test. And it would be something that would make the international coach sit up and take notice. Hard to know.
So Scarlets next week, we've allegedly going to break the record of bonus point wins in a row if we beat them with a bonus point. However, 2 things: one, it's in Scarletania, so and they've had a near miss against Ulster, so they might be coming out angry. But also something I discovered during the week when I had a look back. The Glasgow actually did 8 in a row, 8 bonus point wins in a row in 2019. However, the last game was against Ulster in the semi-final. So for whatever reason, it doesn't count as a league game. Counts for me.
You wouldn't you wouldn't get bonus points in those games, would you?
No, but they scored 4 tries.
Yeah, but you wouldn't win by bonus points.
To talk about records,
True.
I mean, to be honest with you, you beat Scarlets in. I mean, you beat Scarlets in Wales. It's always been tough to do. It's hard to know how good Scarlets are at this point in time. I'm not sure. they vary often within matches from looking like a very, very good side, like the side that Wayne Pivac had playing really well, to an absolute rabble.
Yeah.
Often within the space of 20 minutes within a game. So it's hard to know. One of the things that there has been consistency of selection in the Leinster team, which is something that very few Leinster coaches have had, even with or without players. They've had very little opportunity for consistency of selection, and there has been consistency of selection because the international players have been away for so long on that international break. I think you mentioned it at the beginning of the show, Jay. Because they've been away for, what is it now, 6 weeks? That Leo Castor have had an opportunity to pick the same team. So going into the Scarlets game, it won't be the same mix and gather 'em that it can be sometimes with guys coming back from international squads, guys going off to international squads, guys coming back from injury, guys going off injured. There's a consistency of selection available to them that hasn't necessarily been the case at any point in the past before April. You know, from April on, you can generally have everyone that you're going to have available to you, so you can pick a consistent team. But we very rarely see that kind of consistency selection at this point in the season. Of course, it is an unusual season, so that kind of accounts for it. But it will serve us well going away from home, because and as we said, the stats for away wins versus home wins have soared in the absence of crowds.
Of course.
Scarlets have played 3 away games. Sorry, 3 home. So Scarlets have played 3 home games this season and have lost 2 of them. And we didn't play them last season at all, because one of the matches that was postponed and wasn't rescheduled was against them. But if you look back to the season before that, we played them 4 times. We actually lost our opening match I think it was in early September. We lost 23-21 over there. And then we played them in Dublin and won 22-17. So it was we lost by 2 points, won by 5 points. And that was the year then that we played them in the Pro 14 final and beat them 40 points to 32. In their sort of the biggest fixture that we ever played against them was that European Cup semi-final, where we kind of did a number on them and beat them 38-16.
Well, in fairness, the one that was 40-32, Johnny McNichol came back and scored 2 or 3 tries in the last 10 minutes.
That's right.
Yeah.
I think we were celebrating at that stage.
Yeah, one of those tries was clocking the red. One of those tries was the try that finished the game. So, yeah, if Leinster go about this the way they should, and the selection is okay, because there's no injuries and stuff like this, there's no way it's very hard to see anything past a Leinster win. And it's weird saying that about going away to Scarlets, but Scarlets are one of the teams that it's really hard to go over to Clonettley, because they're a great side, a great club, and they've real pride in their jersey, but they just don't have the players right now.
And they've no crowd, as you say.
No crowd.
But I think that's an excellent point that you make, though, about the consistency of selection. That's just not been a factor. And getting guys a run of games, guys come to a boil, and to come to a boil at this early point of the season is excellent. Like, you're nearly saying fellas like Michael Bent need a fucking break. They need to follow.
They might need a break, John, but I'd say there's probably a good chunk of them are looking at it. This could be our last chance to stake a claim or even play for a contract going forward, for some considerable time, because the internationals are going to drift back the week after next. You've got the Heineken Cup matches, you've got the Interpro derbies at Christmas, you've got another 2 rounds of Heineken Cup. So it's probably, you're talking 2 to 3 months of
rest.
Of rest, yeah. But of the lads that have kind of got us into the 7 from 7 position, they're going to be rotated out of the system for the next, say, 2 months.
I'd say the best that Michael Bent can hope for is 50 minutes rest.
Yeah. If that.
So yeah.
Yeah, I think there's we play Georgia this weekend. Then there's the final weekend of the championship. I think there's a gap week then, and then it's into the Heineken matches. Yeah.
Yeah, the gap week is the, as far as I know, the gap week is the Heineken, is the last week of the international.
Yeah, the Autumn Nations finals weekend.
Yeah, sorry.
That is the gap week.
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry.
And then it's Heineken Cup the following week. So international players are going to go straight from the final or the playoff, shall we say, into the Heineken Cup. So it's looking like it's gonna be England, France, and then Ireland, Scotland. Is it? No, Ireland. Yeah, Ireland, Scotland, and then Italy, Wales, and Georgia probably have to scratch themselves because Fiji are probably gone home. The amount of COVID they have, which is not a laughing matter. But yeah, they haven't had to play a game, so don't know. Will they get to play? Have they got a game this weekend? Is there a game going ahead?
Well, they're scheduled to play Scotland. The matches are Scotland, Fiji, Wales, England, France, Italy, and obviously Ireland, Georgia.
So we'll probably have a game against Scotland to look forward to, but it's in Lansdowne Road.
Yeah.
So we'll see. Will we learn anything from that? Who knows?
Well, they gave us a good. I mean, like, you know, they were unlucky. I think was it Hogg dropped the ball over the line in February, was it?
Yeah.
Opening match of the Six Nations. So, you know, like they're certainly an improving side.
Yeah, they seem to have leapfrogged Wales in the Six Nations pecking order.
Yeah.
So it's be interesting, and they've looked doughty in their last couple of games. So
there's a good side in there somewhere.
Yeah, there is. Yeah.
I'd love to see Italy against Georgia as the final, as a you know, sort of just to kind of put that argument to bed, maybe. Just like I think we should be investing in Italy and trying to bring them up instead of continually knocking them.
I think we all do. I think we all agree with that, and World Rugby do as well. So
yeah. Just a couple of things. Just want to run through very quickly the other games at the weekend. Obviously, this is all depending on COVID, but Connacht take on Ospreys in Galway. Treviso play Dragons. Cardiff play Glasgow. Munster plays Ebre, and Edinburgh take on Ulster in the other games. And before we go, gents, I just wanted to obviously mention Christophe Dominici and his sad passing. Like I'm sure anyone who remembers rugby from the 90s and early noughties remembers him playing like he was a great player, and it's very sad for him to die so young, only 48.
Yeah.
The World Cup match between France and New Zealand. Was it the '99 World Cup?
99, yeah.
Between France and you two more different looking wingers you couldn't imagine. You had John Lomu on one wing and you had Christophe Dominici on the other. You know, and it was Dominici came out on top. I think that was one of the best individual performances in any rugby match I've ever seen, along with a great team performance from France to beat the All Blacks. But his individual performance that day was absolutely unbelievable. Very successful man with Stade Francais as well. Won 3 or 4 top 14s. It's very, very sad. He's only a young man. I mean, he's younger than the three of us, isn't he?
Yeah.
Considerably.
Younger than all three of us. I mean, it's so very sad. Such a great player.
Anyway, it is. So anyway, boys, thanks very much. Thanks very much for watching. If you are following us on Facebook or Twitter, please give thumbs up and a like and a subscription. Thanks again. Cheers.